The readings this week from 2nd Chronicles really highlight the difference in attitude and purpose between this telling of the history of God's people and the telling in the books of Samuel and Kings. Last week I called your attention to stories from the reign of David and the beginning of the reign of Solomon that aren't in 2nd Chronicles. And I'm going to do that again with a sweeping generalization. There is practically nothing about the kingdom of Israel in the Chronicles. This week we're going to read about the rebellion of Jeroboam and the establishment of the northern kingdom, and that's about it. After that, the chronicler refers to the kingdom of Israel only when it somehow has an impact on the story of Judah. And I think that's because the chronicler wants us to know the story of the house of David. Once Israel abandons the house of David, they're no longer of interest. The kings in 2nd Chronicles are largely portrayed as faithful and pious keepers of the law of God. They have their flaws, but their heart is where the heart of their ancestor David was, directed towards their God. There's a beautiful example of this in chapter 13, when King Abijah of Judah makes a speech to Jeroboam and his army of Israel. They're assembled for battle against Judah. And Abijah says, "Do you think you can defeat us just because you have lots of soldiers and those golden calves that Jeroboam made? You have abandoned the Lord, and you've driven out the Lord's priests. As for us, the Lord is our God. We have not abandoned the Lord. God is with us. If you fight against us, you are fighting against God, and you cannot succeed." That speech is not in 2 Kings. There's no suggestion that Abijah portrayed himself as the representative of the Lord. Oh, and because Abijah trusted in the Lord, the battle did go his way, it says in Chronicles. Israel laid an ambush, but they failed to overcome Judah, who, with the help of the Lord, defeated Israel and even conquered some of their land. Now, a king does emerge who's described as evil. That's Jehoram. His wickedness seems to be blamed on his wife. Maybe you remember King Ahab of Israel, the one who opposed the prophet Elijah and was married to Jezebel. Well, his daughter was the wife of King Jehoram, and she led him astray. Now, here's a curious feature. 2nd Chronicles says that Jehoram received a letter from the prophet Elijah warning him of a great plague that would come upon the people. And this would be God's punishment for abandoning the ways of his ancestor David and following the ways of his father-in-law Ahab instead. The letter also told him that he would die of a serious disease of the bowels. Okay, this is the curious thing. According to 2 Kings, Elijah had already ascended into heaven well before Jehoram came to the throne. So the chronicler must have had his prophets confused. Well, the important thing is the point the chronicler made, which we're going to see again next week. The people of God will prevail if they remain faithful to God. It is the responsibility of leadership to see to it that society is faithful to the ways of the Lord rather than giving in to the practices of others or to their own self-gratification. In the mind of the chronicler, most of the heirs of David did their part faithfully, so the house of David continued to rule for hundreds of years.